Doctors said I might not make it, but my son chose his wife's birthday over me. Until he found out. My only son told the doctor that if I died, I died. He said it with a laugh, over the phone from his wife's birthday party, while I lay in a hospital bed just a few miles away, fighting for every breath. This is the story of how I found out the truth, and how I made him pay for it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My eyelids fluttered, feeling heavy as lead shutters. For a moment, there was only darkness, a thick, velvety black. Then, a pulsing green light blinked into existence somewhere to my left, painting strange, fleeting shapes on a stark white ceiling. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of a machine, a lonely metronome in an unnervingly quiet room, a sharp, sterile scent. The kind that screams hospital filled my nostrils. I tried to move my hand and felt a dull ache, the pull of a plastic tube taped to my skin. I was trapped. The door creaked open, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Two figures in scrubs slipped inside, their rubber-soled shoes whispering against the linoleum floor. I let my eyes fall shut again, my breathing deliberately slow and even. I don't know why I did it. It was a primal instinct, a sudden, urgent need to be invisible. One of them moved closer, her presence a faint warmth beside the bed. I heard the rustle of a chart's pages turning. "Her vitals are finally stabilizing," one voice whispered, laced with relief. "Thank God," the second voice replied, heavy with exhaustion. "For a few hours there, I didn't think she would make it." A pause. I imagined them looking down at me, this frail woman tangled in wires and tubes. "I still can't get over it, though," the first voice said, lower this time, almost conspiratorial. "The son?" the second voice guessed immediately. "Her only child, not even here." Dr. Carter called him personally when she was at her worst, the second nurse continued, her voice hardening. "You know what he said?" "What?" "He couldn't make it. He was busy." At his wife's birthday party. The words hung in the air, so absurd, so monstrous, that my mind refused to accept them. Adrian. My Adrian? At a party? While I was... "You're kidding me," the first nurse breathed, horrified. "A birthday party?" "It gets worse," the second nurse said, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. "Dr. Carter told me he actually laughed. He said something like, 'Well, she's old. It was bound to happen sooner or later.'" A coldness unlike any illness spread from my chest, seeping into my limbs, chilling me to the bone. The machine beside me picked up its tempo, its beeps accelerating with my frantic heart. I fought to keep my expression placid, to keep my breathing steady. It couldn't be true. It was a nightmare, a cruel trick of the morphine dulling my senses and twisting reality. My son, my sweet boy whom I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, could not have said those words. He could not be that person. But as the nurses finished their checks and slipped back out of the room, leaving me once again in the pulsing green glow, their words remained. They echoed in the silence, refusing to be dismissed as a dream. They felt too real, too sharp, too cold. A tiny poisonous seed of doubt had been planted in the most vulnerable part of my soul, and I had a terrifying feeling that it had already begun to grow. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide hospital window, painting a deceptively cheerful yellow square on the sterile white floor. But the light couldn't penetrate the cold dread that had settled in my heart. The nurse's whispered words from the night before played on a loop in my mind. "Busy at his wife's birthday party." He actually laughed. I was picking at a piece of dry toast when the door swung open. In walked Adrian and Sophia, their faces masks of deep concern. Sophia rushed to my side, her manicured hands fluttering near my shoulder but not quite touching it. "Oh, Mother Ellison, you're awake. You gave us the most terrible scare," she said, her voice a pitch too high. Adrian followed, placing a small, sad-looking basket of carnations on the bedside table. "Mom, how are you feeling? We were worried sick all night." I looked at my son. His eyes, the same deep brown as his father's, wouldn't quite meet mine. He looked tired, but it was the slick, frayed look of someone who'd been up late celebrating, not worrying. The lie was so blatant, so poorly delivered, it was almost insulting. "I'm tired," I managed, my voice raspy. "The doctors say I was lucky." "Lucky is an understatement," Adrian said, finally looking at me. He squeezed my hand, his palm clammy. "We were imagining the worst. I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom." Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her perfectly styled blonde hair bouncing. Adrian was just beside himself. He barely touched his dinner last night. We just sat there, waiting by the phone. I stared at them, this perfect, caring couple. It was a flawless performance. The loving son, the devoted daughter-in-law. Every line was delivered with practiced sincerity. Yet, something was off. The way Sophia smiled didn't reach her eyes. The way Adrian kept glancing at his watch. I felt like I was watching a play, and I was the only one in the audience who hadn't been given a script. Just then, a young man in a courier's uniform knocked briskly on the open door. He was wrestling with an enormous, ostentatious floral arrangement, a cascade of white lilies, exotic orchids, and birds of paradise that was so large it barely fit through the doorway. It made Adrian's little basket of carnations look like a weed patch. "Delivery for the Ellisons," the young man announced cheerfully. He scanned a slip of paper. "Big congratulations on the successful event." The room went silent. I saw Adrian's face drain of all color. He shot a panicked look at Sophia, who had frozen mid-smile. "There must be some mistake," Adrian said quickly, stepping between the courier and my bed. His voice was tight. "We didn't order any flowers." "It says right here," the courier insisted, holding up the order form. "Sophia and Adrian Ellison, St. Mary's Hospital, room 302, from the board of the Children's Literacy Fund." He beamed. "Must have been quite a party." "It's a mix-up," Adrian snapped, his voice sharp with an authority that bordered on rude. He started to herd the young man back toward the door. "Take them back. We're dealing with a family emergency here." But it was too late. My eyes had locked onto the large, cream-colored card tucked among the lilies. The gold-embossed script was perfectly clear, even from across the room. To Sophia and Adrian Ellison, it read, "A huge congratulations on a successful fundraising gala. Your dedication is an inspiration." Fundraising gala. Not a birthday party. The lie, so simple and yet so profound, hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just missed my near-death experience for a simple celebration. They had missed it for a high-profile social event, a party for their own ambition, for their own image. The whispers in the dark were no longer a morphine-induced dream. They were the cold, hard truth. Adrian, flustered, finally managed to push the courier and the magnificent bouquet out into the hallway, shutting the door with a soft click. When he turned about, his face was a mess of feigned confusion and irritation. "Can you believe the incompetence?" he scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "Sending someone else's flowers here, of all the times." But I wasn't listening. I was looking at the small, pathetic basket of carnations on my nightstand. It was a prop, a cheap, flimsy prop in the elaborate play of their lives. and I was just a character they needed to manage, an obstacle in their script. The first crack in their perfect facade had appeared, and through it, I could see the darkness underneath. The performance was over. My own investigation was about to begin. Returning home was the strangest part of it all. For 40 years, this old colonial house in the Boston suburbs had been my sanctuary, a place filled with the scent of my husband David's pipe tobacco and the sound of Adrian's childhood laughter. Now, a week after being discharged, it was just quiet, a deep, hollow silence that echoed with everything I had lost and everything I now suspected. The house wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a stage. I spent the first few days moving through the rooms like a ghost, my own reflection in the polished wood floors startling me. The woman who stared back was thinner, her face etched with lines of a pain that wasn't just physical. The soft, trusting teacher was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone with a cold fire simmering behind her eyes. I knew I couldn't just sit here, waiting for the next lie. If they were going to treat me like a fool, I would have to play the part better than they could ever imagine. The decision was made on a Tuesday afternoon. Adrian called, his voice dripping with false concern, to say he and Sophia were popping by to check on me. I stood in front of the grand fireplace, my hand resting on the cool marble mantel, and took a deep breath. The curtain was about to rise. When they arrived, I made sure to seem frail, leaning heavily on my cane. I offered them a weak, watery smile. "It's so good to see you, dears," I said, letting my voice tremble slightly. My head is still in such a fog since everything. "That's totally understandable, Mom," Adrian said, guiding me to my favorite armchair. "The doctor said it could take weeks, even months, for the confusion to clear up. You just need to rest." Sophia placed a container of soup on the coffee table. "We brought you some butternut squash soup, your favorite. We just want to make sure you're eating." They were so perfect, so caring. It made my stomach turn. I let them fuss over me for a few minutes before I began. "You know," I started, looking into the middle distance as if trying to grasp a fleeting thought. "A funny thing popped into my head today. Adrian, that $50,000 I gave you for that wonderful green energy project you were so excited about. How is it doing? I can't for the life of me remember what you said it was called." I watched them. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A flicker in Adrian's eyes, a quick, sharp glance exchanged with Sophia. He recovered instantly, putting on a reassuring smile. "Oh, that. It's doing great, Mom, really great," he said smoothly. "It's a long-term investment. You know how these things are. The market's a little shaky, but it's poised for a huge breakthrough. You don't need to worry your head about it." "Oh, good," I said, nodding slowly. "My memory is just playing tricks on me." I paused, letting the silence stretch. And there was something else. Something about the bank. Did I sign some papers for you recently? I have this nagging feeling you brought something over, but it's all a blur. This time, the hesitation was more obvious. Adrian's smile tightened at the edges. "Papers? Oh, that was nothing important, Mom. Just some routine updates for your accounts. Standard procedure. I took care of everything," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Just making sure your insurance policies were all up to date," Sophia chimed in, a little too quickly. "With the health scare and all, we wanted to be sure you were covered." And there it was, a tiny crack. "Account updates," he'd said. "Insurance policies," she'd said. Two different answers for the same phantom piece of paper. They hadn't rehearsed this part. They were improvising, and they weren't on the same page. I didn't let my expression change. I just nodded, looking confused and relieved. "Oh, of course. Insurance. That makes sense. Thank you for looking out for your silly old mother. They stayed for another 20 minutes, filling the silence with cheerful, empty chatter. When they left, they believed they had successfully navigated the ramblings of a post-stroke patient. They thought they were in control. I listened to their car pull out of the driveway. I stood up, my back straight, the cane forgotten by the side of the chair. The pain in my heart was still there, a dull, constant ache. But it was now mixed with something else, a cold, clear sense of purpose. For years, I had analyzed characters in books, dissecting their motives and predicting their actions. Now, my son and his wife were my subjects. The performance had begun, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I would not be the one to forget my lines. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the deep leather chair opposite Robert Hensley's mahogany desk. Robert had been my husband's lawyer and closest friend for over 30 years. His office was a time capsule of quiet dignity, filled with the smell of old books and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the cheap, modern lies I'd been living with. Robert, a man with a kind face and eyes that had seen everything, leaned forward. "Margaret, you said on the phone it was about David's will. Is everything all right?" I took a shaky breath. This was the first time I was voicing my suspicions out loud, and I felt a tremor of fear. What if he thought I was just a paranoid old woman, confused after a major health crisis? "Robert," I began, my voice low, "I need to tell you something in the strictest confidence. I haven't been entirely, well, my memory has been hazy, but I'm beginning to suspect that Adrian and Sophia are taking advantage of my condition." I laid it all out for him. The conflicting stories about the papers I'd supposedly signed, the vague answers about the $50,000 investment, the unsettling feeling that I was being managed, handled. I told him about my act, my feigned confusion. Throughout my story, Robert didn't look surprised. He just listened, his expression growing more and more grim. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, steepling his fingers under his chin. "Margaret," he said finally, his voice full of a sad gravity. "David saw this coming. He hoped he was wrong, but he was never one to leave things to chance." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "David loved Adrian more than anything," Robert said gently. "But he wasn't blind. He saw the boy's ambition, his weakness for the easy way out. He worried that Adrian's lifestyle and Sophia's influence would one day put you in a difficult position." Robert stood and walked over to a massive, old-fashioned safe tucked behind a framed map of historic Boston. He turned the heavy dial with a series of practiced clicks and pulled the thick steel door open. From inside, he withdrew a single, thick manila envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in David's familiar, elegant script. "David set things up differently than you know," Robert explained, placing the envelope on the desk in front of me. "He didn't leave his assets directly to you. He put everything, this house, the savings, the entire estate, into an irrevocable trust, the Ellison Trust." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "A trust? Why?" "To protect you," he said simply. "You are the sole trustee, the manager of the funds for your lifetime. You have complete control over your own life, but you cannot sell the primary assets, like the house, or sign them over to anyone without the approval of a 3-person board, a board that consists of you, me, and David's cousin in Chicago." The air left my lungs in a rush. The papers I'd supposedly signed, they were worthless. The house Adrian and Sophia were so clearly eyeing was untouchable. "Adrian is the beneficiary," Robert continued. But he only inherits what's left after you're gone, and only under very strict conditions. David made sure of that. He essentially locked up the family fortune to keep it safe from the very person he wanted to give it to. He tapped the envelope. He also left you this. He told me to give it to you if you ever came to me with these exact concerns. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, and the moment I saw the handwriting, tears welled in my eyes. It was from David. My dearest Margaret, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come to pass, and I am not there to protect you. I am so sorry. Forgive me for this secret, but I could not bear to burden you with my worries while I was alive. I saw the path Adrian was on, the hunger in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide. It's not that he is evil, my love, but he is weak, and he is married to a woman who preys on that weakness. The Ellison Trust is your shield. He cannot touch you. He cannot pressure you. He cannot take the home we built together. It is all safe. This was the only way I knew to keep you secure. Now, you must be strong. The woman who stood by me through everything, who raised our son, who faced the world with such grace, she is still in there. Trust your instincts. They have never failed you. Be the fierce, intelligent woman I always knew you were. I love you. Always. Yours, David. I folded the letter, the paper crinkling in my hands. The tears that fell were not just of grief, but of a profound, soul-shaking relief. I wasn't going mad. I wasn't alone. My husband, from beyond the grave, had just handed me a sword and a shield. The game had changed, and I finally knew the rules. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. My follow-up appointment with Dr. Evelyn Carter felt different. The first time I was in her office, I was a patient, fragile and disoriented. This time, I walked in under my own power, David's letter and Robert's words echoing in my mind like a battle hymn. I was no longer just a patient. I was a woman with a purpose. Dr. Carter was sharp and efficient, her questions precise as she checked my blood pressure and listened to my heart. She had a no-nonsense air about her that I'd found intimidating before, but now found reassuring. "Well, Margaret, your recovery is remarkable," she said, making a note in my file. "Physically, you're bouncing back faster than I expected." She put her pen down and looked at me, her gaze steady and analytical. "But that's not the only change, is it? There's something different in your eyes. The fog has lifted." I met her gaze without flinching. "You could say that, doctor." She leaned back in her chair, studying me for a long moment. The professional mask seemed to slip, revealing something more personal, more intense. "I had a feeling," she said quietly. "When I saw your son and his wife in the hallway that night, it reminded me of something, of someone." She stood up and walked to the door, turning the lock with a soft but decisive click. The sound seemed to seal us off from the rest of the world. When she turned back, her expression was one of grim resolution. "Margaret, I'm going to go out on a limb here because I think you're strong enough to hear the truth. And frankly, I think you deserve to know you're not crazy." She paused. "My name is Evelyn Carter. My maiden name was Evelyn Hayes." The name meant nothing to me. I just stared, waiting. 5 years ago, my younger sister, Clara, lost her entire life savings, over $200,000. She invested it all in a can't-miss real estate development project. The man who sold her on the idea was charming, handsome, and utterly convincing. He was a junior associate at the firm handling the deal. He assured her it was a sure thing. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I already knew where this was going. The project was a sham, of course, Dr. Carter continued, her voice tight with old anger. A shell company designed to collect funds and then disappear. My sister was ruined. She had to sell her home. It broke her spirit completely. The junior associate who roped her in claimed he was just as much a victim as the investors. He was never charged, but we knew. We always knew he got a cut. She let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. That man's name was Adrian Ellison. The world tilted on its axis. It all clicked into place. Her pointed questions that night, the strange intensity in her eyes. She wasn't just a random doctor on call. Fate, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. So when the ER nurse told me Margaret Ellison was admitted in critical condition and her son was being difficult, Dr. Carter said, her voice laced with ice. I knew I had to make the call myself. It wasn't just about getting consent for treatment. It was a test. I wanted to hear for myself what kind of man he'd become. She walked to her desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a small black USB flash drive. She held it between her thumb and forefinger. He failed the test, Margaret. Spectacularly. She placed the flash drive in my palm. It felt cold and heavy, impossibly so for such a small object. Hospitals like ours have a protocol, she explained. For critical care situations where next of kin are contacted by phone, the calls are recorded. For legal and liability reasons, it's standard procedure. This is a copy of my conversation with your son. She looked me straight in the eye. Every single word, including the part where he laughed. I closed my hand around the drive, the plastic edges digging into my skin. The whispers I'd heard in the dark. The lies about the fundraising gala, the secret of the trust. They were all pieces of a puzzle I had been assembling in the dark. This tiny piece of plastic was the last one. It was the piece that showed the whole ugly picture. I felt a strange, unexpected kinship with the woman standing in front of me. Two strangers, bound together by the same man's casual cruelty. Thank you, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Dr. Carter just nodded. Use it when you're ready, she said. Justice has a way of being patient. I drove home from Dr. Carter's office in a daze, the small USB drive a cold, hard weight in my coat pocket. The familiar, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, with their stately colonial houses and perfectly manicured lawns, seemed like a movie set. Everything looked the same, but the reality underneath had been ripped away, exposing something rotten and ugly. I was no longer a grieving widow trying to make sense of a health scare. I was a woman who had been handed a weapon. I parked the car in the garage and walked into the house, the silence greeting me like an old, unwelcome friend. I didn't stop in the kitchen to put my purse down. I didn't pause in the living room. I walked straight up the grand staircase, my steps sure and steady, my hand gripping the polished oak banister. I had a destination. In my bedroom, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. I walked to the far wall, to the large framed oil painting of a New England seascape that David had bought me for our 20th anniversary. My hands were steady as I lifted it from its hook and carefully set it on the floor. Behind it was the thing no one but David, Robert, and I knew about. A small black wall safe, flush with the floral wallpaper. My fingers trembled slightly as I spun the combination dial. Our anniversary, followed by my birthday. A sequence of numbers that had once represented love and security. The lock clicked open with a soft, metallic thud. Inside, things were just as David and I had left them. A stack of old stock certificates, mostly worthless now, but too sentimental to throw away. The deed to the house. David's gold watch that he was given upon his retirement. a small velvet pouch containing my mother's diamond earrings, and tucked in the back, a small leather-bound box. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what was supposed to be in that box. I reached in and pulled it out. The leather was soft and worn under my fingertips. For a moment, I just held it, a wave of memories washing over me. My grandmother wearing the necklace at her own wedding, her face beaming, my mother fastening it around my neck on my wedding day, her hands gentle as she whispered, "Now it's yours to protect." It was a single strand of perfectly matched Akoya pearls with a delicate antique diamond clasp. It wasn't the most valuable piece of jewelry we owned in terms of money, but in terms of sentiment, it was priceless. It was our family's history, a tangible link to the strong women I came from. I took a deep breath and opened the box. It was empty. The red velvet lining stared up at me, a gaping, silent accusation. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. I ran my fingers over the indentation where the pearls should have been resting. It couldn't be. I checked the other items. The watch was there. The earrings were there. Only the necklace was gone. And in that instant, I knew. It was a flash of absolute, sickening certainty. I knew who had taken it. I knew when they had taken it. Sometime during the days I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. And I knew, with a clarity that made my blood run cold, where it was now. I pictured Sophia at her fundraising gala, smiling for the cameras, my grandmother's pearls gleaming against her skin. A stolen legacy worn as a trophy. This was no longer about money. The $50,000, the attempts to get me to sign papers, that was a betrayal of trust. This was a desecration. This was a theft of memory, of love, of identity. It was the ultimate act of contempt, a final, brutal confirmation that to my son and his wife, I was not a person. I was a vault to be emptied. That was it, the last straw. I closed the empty box and placed it back in the safe. I shut the heavy steel door, spun the dial, and hung the painting back in its place, making sure it was perfectly straight. Then I walked over to the large, gilded mirror above my dresser and looked at myself. The woman who looked back was not the same one who had left the house that morning. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. The heartbreaking sadness was gone. All of it had been burned away, leaving behind something hard and cold and unbreakable. The soft, gentle literature teacher was dead. In her place stood a warrior. A cold fury, pure and precise, settled over me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my grief for senility. They were about to find out how wrong they were. For the next week, I moved with a chilling sense of clarity. The grief for the son I thought I had was replaced by the cold, hard mechanics of setting a trap. Every morning, I would wake up and feel the empty space in the safe like a physical wound, and it would fuel me for the day ahead. I was no longer playing the part of a confused old woman. I was directing the final act of a tragedy, and my son was the star. The time came on a Thursday afternoon. I picked up the phone, my hand steady, and dialed Adrian's number. I took a moment to compose myself, summoning the frail, trembling voice I had perfected. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Oh, Adrian, dear," I began, letting a manufactured sigh tremble through the line. "I'm all right. Just tired. This whole ordeal has really taken it out of me. It's made me think." "Think about what, Mom?" he asked, a note of cautious interest in his voice. "About the future. About this big, empty house," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm not getting any younger, and after what happened, well, I think it's time I started to simplify things. I want to make sure you and Sophia are taken care of." This was the bait, shiny and irresistible. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Mom, you don't have to worry about that. We just want you to be healthy. The words were right, but the tone was wrong. It was the flat, unconvincing tone of a man trying to hide a winning lottery ticket. No, I insist, I said, adding a touch of weak finality to my voice. I'd like you and Sophia to come for dinner on Saturday. A proper family dinner. We can talk everything over then. I'd like to start the process of handing some assets over, starting with the house. The silence that followed was electric. I knew I had him. He was hooked. Of course, Mom, he finally said, his voice thick with poorly suppressed excitement. Of course. We'll be there. Whatever you want. What time? 7 o'clock, I said. And Adrian, I've taken the liberty of inviting Robert Hensley as well, just to have a witness, to make sure everything we discuss is proper and legal. If he felt any alarm at the mention of a lawyer, his greed quickly overrode it. To him, Robert's presence would only serve to legitimize the handover. It was the seal of approval on his victory. That's a great idea, Mom. Very smart. We'll see you Saturday. He was practically purring. The days leading up to the dinner were surreal. I went about the preparations with a calm that felt almost alien. I planned the menu. A roast chicken, David's favorite. A dish I had made for countless happy family occasions. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. As I polished the silver and set the dining room table with our best china, each fork and knife I laid down felt like positioning a chess piece for the final checkmate. The house, which had felt so empty and haunted, was now charged with a tense, expectant energy. It was the quiet of the battlefield before the first shot is fired. On Saturday evening, I stood by the window and watched them pull into the driveway. They got out of their sleek black Mercedes, Sophia in a stylish dress and Adrian in a crisp blazer. They looked like they were arriving to sign a lucrative business deal, not to visit a convalescing parent. When I opened the door, they were all smiles, bearing a ridiculously expensive bottle of French wine. Mother Ellison, you look wonderful, Sophia chirped, air kissing the space beside my cheek. Mom, the house smells incredible, Adrian said, handing me the wine. It feels like old times. You have no idea, I thought. I led them into the dining room, where Robert Hensley was already waiting, a folder resting on the table beside him. They greeted him with the confident warmth of people who believe the world is about to be handed to them on a silver platter. As we all sat down at the perfectly set table, the candlelight flickering across their eager, smiling faces, I felt a profound and chilling calm. The storm was here. The curtain was rising, and I was ready. The dinner was a masterclass in hypocrisy. Adrian and Sophia played their parts to perfection, hanging on my every word as if I were a queen holding court. They couldn't do enough for me, refilling my water glass before it was empty, insisting I take the choicest pieces of chicken, laughing a little too loudly at my mildest pleasantries. It was a suffocating performance of affection. Honestly, Mom, you really shouldn't have gone to all this trouble, Adrian said for the third time, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. We could have just ordered something in. Nonsense, I said with a weak wave of my hand. It felt good to be useful. It's been a while. Well, this is more than useful. It's magnificent, Sophia gushed. And this dining room? It's just so classic. They don't build houses with this kind of character anymore. Her eyes swept over the mahogany wainscoting and the crystal chandelier, a covetous gleam I had seen many times before. She wasn't admiring the room. She was taking inventory. Robert Hensley was mostly silent through the meal, a quiet, observant presence. He ate his dinner with a lawyer's deliberate patience, his gaze occasionally flicking from Adrian to Sophia, then to me. He was the audience, the jury, waiting for the play to unfold. They kept up the charade through dessert, a simple apple crumble. They talked about their work, their friends, their plans for a trip to Europe in the spring, all the glittering details of a life I was no longer a part of. They spoke as if my health scare was a temporary inconvenience that had now been tidied up, allowing them to resume their regularly scheduled programming. Finally, when the coffee was poured, I decided it was time. I let out a long theatrical sigh and pressed my hand to my chest. "I'm so glad we could do this," I began, my voice soft and weary. "Having you both here with Robert, it feels right." As I said on the phone, Adrian, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." They both leaned forward, their expressions a perfect blend of sympathy and anticipation. "This house. Your father and I built a wonderful life here, but it's too much for one person. The stairs, the garden, the memories. Some days, it's all a bit overwhelming." I looked at my son, trying to pour every ounce of maternal vulnerability I could fake into my gaze. "I'm tired of fighting it." "Mom, whatever you need, we're here for you," Adrian said, his voice smooth as silk. I nodded slowly. "I know, dear, and that's why I've made my decision." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, thick with their greed. I looked from Adrian to Sophia, then over to Robert, who watched me with an unreadable expression. "I've decided," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "that it's time. I'm going to transfer ownership of the house to you, Adrian." The effect was instantaneous. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Adrian's face, a look of pure, unadulterated victory. He tried to fight it, to maintain his mask of sober concern, but he failed. It was the look of a gambler who had just drawn a royal flush. He shot a quick, electric glance at Sophia, whose own carefully composed face was alight with triumph. She gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation that their long game had finally paid off. "Mom," Adrian started, his voice thick with emotion, or at least a convincing imitation of it. I don't know what to say. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, feeling a cold, hard satisfaction. "You can use it to build your career, to secure your future. It's what your father would have wanted." "Thank you," he breathed, reaching across the table to take my hand. His felt warm and strong, the hand of a victor. "Thank you. You've taken such a weight off our minds." He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with the promise of $2.5 million. He believed he had won. He believed the play was over and that he was taking his final bow. He had no idea he was still on my stage, and the curtain was just about to fall on him. Adrian's hand was still covering mine on the table, a gesture of proprietary triumph. His smile was wide and genuine for the first time all evening, and Sophia was looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. They were a king and queen surveying their newly acquired kingdom. Just as Adrian opened his mouth to say something more, probably another empty platitude about how he would take care of me, a sound cut through the warm, celebratory atmosphere. Thump. It was the sound of Robert Hensley placing a thick, leather-bound folder on the polished mahogany table. The sound wasn't loud, but it had the finality of a judge's gavel. Adrian and Sophia both turned to look at him. The smiles on their faces faltered slightly, becoming questioning. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Robert said, his voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Adrian. "While your mother's sentiment is, I'm sure, appreciated, what she's proposing is a legal impossibility." Adrian slowly withdrew his hand from mine. What are you talking about, Robert? My mother wants to give me the house. You're here to make it legal, right? No, Adrian, I'm here to uphold the law, Robert said calmly. He tapped the folder with his index finger. And more specifically, I am here to uphold the legally binding terms of the Ellison Trust. The what? Sophia asked in Besson, her voice sharp and brittle. It was the first time she had spoken in 10 minutes. Robert opened the folder, revealing dozens of pages of dense legal text. The Ellison Trust, an irrevocable trust established by your father, David Ellison, over a decade ago. Upon his death, nearly all of his assets, including this house, the savings, the investment portfolios, everything, were transferred into this trust. Adrian stared, his face a mask of confusion. A trust? Why would he do that? He left everything to Mom. That's the common misconception, Robert said. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. He didn't leave his assets to your mother. He left them in the care of your mother. She is the primary trustee and lifetime beneficiary, which means she has the full and unrestricted use of the estate to live on for the rest of her life. But she does not own the assets themselves. The trust does. The color began to drain from Adrian's face. Sophia was completely still. Her eyes narrowed, processing every word with the intensity of a predator. I don't understand, Adrian stammered. What does that mean? It means, Robert said, his voice clear and precise, that your mother cannot give you this house. She cannot sell it. She cannot transfer the deed. She cannot even take out a second mortgage on it. Any such action would require a unanimous vote from the trust's 3-person board of directors. Board of directors? Adrian echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. That would be your mother, Robert said, gesturing to me. Myself, as the family's legal counsel, and your father's cousin, Eleanor Vance, in Chicago. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I can assure you, Adrian, that any motion to sign this property over to you would be dead in the water. The silence in the room was absolute. The cozy, candlelit dinner party had vanished, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of a legal proceeding. Adrian's face had crumpled. The triumphant smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed look of utter bewilderment. He looked like a man who had just been told the winning lottery ticket he was holding was a forgery. Sophia's reaction was different. There was no confusion on her face. There was only a dawning icy rage. She stared at Adrian, and in her eyes, I saw the exact moment her adoration curdled into contempt. She had backed the wrong horse. Adrian finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate sound. This is a joke. This has to be some kind of sick joke, he said, shaking his head, looking from Robert's impassive face to my own. Right, Mom? Tell him. Tell him it's a joke. The play was over. The house of cards had collapsed, and he was standing in the ruins, finally understanding he had never held a single one. Adrian's desperate plea hung in the dead air of the dining room. Tell him it's a joke, Mom. His voice was thin, pleading. He was looking for an escape hatch, a way to rewind the last 5 minutes. He was looking to me, the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated, to save him. I ignored him completely. I let his question dissolve into the oppressive silence and slowly turned my head, my gaze settling on Sophia. She was sitting ramrod straight, her face a pale, tight mask of fury. She was already calculating, her mind racing to find an angle, a way to spin this disaster. You know, Sophia, I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. I've been meaning to tell you all evening. That's a truly beautiful necklace you're wearing. She was startled, thrown off balance by the abrupt change of subject. Her hand instinctively flew to her throat, her fingers brushing against the cool pearls. "Oh, thank you, Mother Ellison. Adrian gave it to me." "Did he?" I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips. He always did have his father's eye for quality. It was my grandmother's, you know. She wore it on her wedding day in 1932. Sophia's hand froze on the necklace. The blood drained from her face, leaving 2 bright spots of rouge on her cheeks. I don't know what you're talking about." "This is new. From a boutique downtown." "Is it?" I continued, my voice still gentle, still serene. "Then you won't mind letting me see the clasp." My grandmother's had the most peculiar detail. Her initials, EM, for Eleanor May, were engraved on the back in a tiny scrolling script, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. The jig was up. Sophia didn't have to look. She knew. The panic in her eyes was a confession. She looked at Adrian, and for the first time, I saw raw, undiluted fear on her face. She hadn't just been caught in a lie. She had been caught wearing stolen goods. She was an accomplice. Adrian looked as if he'd been turned to stone. His mouth was slightly open, his face a pasty, grayish color under the warm candlelight. But I wasn't finished. This was merely the opening act of their public ruin. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the small black USB drive Dr. Carter had given me. I also produced a small, sleek digital audio player. I placed them both on the table with deliberate care. The slight click of the USB drive sliding into the player was unnaturally loud in the silent room. "You see, the thing about lies," I said, looking from my son's terrified face to my daughter-in-law's, "is that they multiply. You tell one, and soon you need 10 more to cover it up. You told me you were at a birthday party. You told me you were worried sick. You told me you were waiting by the phone." I pressed the play button. First, there was the clear, professional voice of Dr. Carter. "Mr. Ellison, this is Dr. Carter from St. Mary's. I'm calling about your mother, Margaret. I'm afraid her condition has become critical." Then Adrian's voice, slick with annoyance. "Critical? What does that mean, exactly? I'm in the middle of something here." Dr. Carter's voice, firm and urgent. "It means her heart is failing. We're doing everything we can, but you need to understand. The next few hours are crucial. We felt you should be here." And then the sound that shattered the world. It was Adrian's laugh, a short, dismissive, utterly soulless chuckle. "Look," his recorded voice said, dripping with a casual cruelty that was far more shocking than any shout. "She's an old woman. This was bound to happen sooner or later. If she dies, she dies." The recording ended. I pressed stop. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, colder, and more terrible than before. Adrian was completely broken. He stared at the small black device on the table as if it were a venomous snake. There was no defense, no explanation, no lie big enough to cover this. But it was Sophia's reaction that was the true final judgment. She slowly turned her head to look at her husband. The fear was gone from her eyes. The anger was gone. All that was left was a look of pure, bottomless disgust. She was looking at him as if he were a piece of filth she had accidentally stepped in. She had hitched her wagon to a man she thought was a cunning wolf, only to discover he was nothing but a pathetic, heartless thief. And in her eyes, I saw his entire future crumble to dust. The silence that followed the recording was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It pressed down on us, filled with the ghost of Adrian's laughter and the finality of his words. "If she dies, she dies." The dining room, which had been the stage for my quiet vengeance, now felt like a courtroom after the verdict has been read. Guilty. Adrian sat hunched over, his hands covering his face. He was making a low, wounded sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Sophia, however, had already moved past disgust. Her face was now a mask of cold, hard calculation. She was assessing the damage, not to our family, but to her own future. I could see the writing on the wall in her eyes. She was already planning her escape. It was Robert Hensley who broke the spell. He neatly squared the documents in his folder, his movements precise and methodical. He was no longer just the family lawyer. He was an officer of the court, and the time for family drama was over. "There is one final piece of business," he said, his voice cutting through Adrian's quiet sobbing. He looked at my son, his expression devoid of any sympathy. "Adrian, your father's trust was designed to protect your mother from your greed. But it was also designed to protect the estate itself. It seems you put that to the test." Adrian looked up, his face blotchy and tear-streaked. "What are you talking about?" "I received a call last week," Robert said calmly, "from a senior loan officer at Boston Merchant Bank. He was conducting due diligence on a rather substantial business loan application you had submitted, a loan for $200,000. Adrian flinched as if he'd been struck. "It seems," Robert continued, his voice as sharp and cold as ice, "that you listed this house as your primary collateral. You submitted a forged document claiming to have power of attorney over your mother's financial affairs, and were attempting to leverage an asset that, as we've just established, you have absolutely no legal claim to." He let that sink in. The bank, of course, ran a title search, which led them to the Ellison Trust, which in turn led them to me. I informed them of the true legal standing of this property. He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Attempting to secure funds by knowingly misrepresenting the ownership of an asset is a textbook definition of bank fraud, Adrian. It's a federal offense." The room went completely still. Even Adrian's pathetic whimpering stopped. The words hung in the air, heavier and more menacing than anything that had been said all night. Fraud, federal offense. "You're not just out of the running for an inheritance, son," Robert said, the word son dripping with a weary disappointment. "You're facing the very real possibility of prison time. They don't take these things lightly." That was it. That was the other shoe dropping. For Sophia, it was the final signal. This was no longer about a lost inheritance. This was about public disgrace, legal fees, and the stinking, unglamorous reality of being tied to a common criminal. Her carefully constructed life was about to be torched, and she had no intention of going down in flames with her husband. With a swift, decisive movement, she stood up. Her chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. She didn't look at Adrian. She didn't look at me. Her movements were fluid and reptilian. She reached up, her fingers working deftly at the antique clasp of my grandmother's necklace. She unfastened it, and for a moment, held the strand of pearls in her hand. Then, with a look of utter contempt, she tossed it onto the center of the table. The pearls landed with a soft, clattering sound next to the digital audio player, a final damning piece of evidence. And then, without a single word, she turned and walked out of the room. We listened to her high heels clicking across the marble floor of the foyer, the sound of the heavy front door opening, and then the decisive final slam as it shut behind her. She had cut her losses. She had thrown him under the bus without a moment's hesitation. Adrian watched her go, his face a mask of utter devastation. In the space of one evening, he had lost everything. The money he had schemed for, the wife he had conspired with, the reputation he had curated, and now his freedom. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own character. He finally lowered his head onto the table, and the sound of his broken sobs filled the room. 6 months later, the world looked different. I was standing on the balcony of a bright, airy apartment overlooking the Atlantic. The salty air whipped strands of my hair across my face, and the cry of gulls replaced the oppressive silence of the old house. Below me, the ocean stretched out, vast and blue and endless. It was the color of freedom. After the dust had settled from that terrible night, I had Robert put the house on the market. With the board's full approval, it sold in less than a month. A young family with laughing children bought it, and I felt a sense of relief watching them bring new life into a place that had become a monument to lies. A large portion of the money went to establishing the David Ellison Memorial Scholarship Fund for underprivileged literature students. It felt like the perfect way to honor the man he was. The rest was more than enough for me to live comfortably, on my own terms. My days were simple now. I read, I walked on the beach, and I tended to the collection of terracotta pots on my balcony, coaxing bright red geraniums and stubborn lavender to bloom. It was on a sunny Tuesday morning, while I was watering these flowers, that the mail arrived. Among the bills and catalogs was a single plain envelope with a postmark from a city I'd never been to in Ohio. The return address was just a P.O. box, but I knew the handwriting instantly. It was Adrian's. My hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. I simply took the letter inside, sat down in my favorite armchair overlooking the sea, and opened it. The letter was short, written on cheap, lined paper. There were no apologies, no excuses, no pleas for forgiveness. He knew, I suppose, that those words would be meaningless. Instead, he just wrote about his life. He wrote about waking up at 5 a.m, his hands calloused and raw from his job on a construction crew. He described the simple exhaustion he felt at the end of the day, the satisfaction of building something real with his own 2 hands. He mentioned that he was living in a small, rented room, and that after his legal fees were paid, he had just enough to get by. He said the work was hard, but it was honest. It was the first honest thing he'd done in a long time. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't ask me to write back. He just signed it. Your son, Adrian. I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it on the table beside me. I felt a distant, quiet sadness for the boy he could have been, for the man he was now forced to become. But I didn't feel anger anymore. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, quiet peace. He was a stranger to me now, living a life a world away, and perhaps that was for the best. Later that week, Robert Hensley called. He told me that Adrian had taken a plea bargain. With the bank pressing charges, he'd been lucky to avoid a long sentence. He was given 2 years of probation and a hefty fine, which he was paying off weekly from his construction wages. Sophia had filed for divorce the week after our dinner, and it had been finalized quickly and quietly. She had vanished from our lives as completely as if she had never existed. Then Robert told me one last thing. There was a final provision in David's trust, Margaret. A failsafe. He explained that David had stipulated that if Adrian ever lost his inheritance rights, a small portion was to be set aside. After 5 full years of holding down a legitimate job and staying on the right side of the law, Robert said, the board is authorized to grant him a small one-time stipend, not enough to make him rich, just enough to start over, a clean slate. I listened, and a slow smile spread across my face. It was so perfectly David. Not a pardon, but a chance. A long, hard road to a single opportunity for redemption, to be earned, not given. I thanked Robert and hung up. I looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon. Adrian had his path, a difficult one of his own making, and I had mine. For the first time in a very long time, my future felt like an open sea, and I was the captain of my own ship, and I was finally free. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0 so we know and can improve future videos. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.